Good evening, and welcome to our current episode of Valley Veterans Forum. Our guest this evening is William C. Helton, or Bill as he prefers to be called, a 30-year veteran of the United States Marine Corps. Bill will tell us the story of his enlistment and training at a very young age, his experiences in Korea, Vietnam, and his deployment to Guantanamo during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The numerous decorations, citations, and campaign ribbons, including 2 Purple Hearts, give a hint of his outstanding achievements serving our country in the United States Marine Corps. Bill, welcome to Valley Veterans Forum.
Thanks for having me. I feel honored being here.
Why don't you give us an idea of what prompted you to join the military and a little bit about your early life?
During World War II, everyone in the United States wanted to be in the service. We used to go to the movies on Saturday and Sunday, and we'd see newsreels. And the news, they would show the war. And it was common that they would have teenagers who had lied about their age, used their brother's birth certificates, and got in the service. This was common. And I came from a broken home. My mother had myself and a sister she was taking care of, and I drove my poor mother batty. I wanted to be a Marine. Of course, I was only a teenager, and Mother says, no, when you graduate from high school, you can go in the service, not before. But I wanted to be in the Marine Corps. I went to school. I wound up going to a boarding school in Kentucky. My mother couldn't take care of me. They had a boarding school, Berea College, for the poor children. There was no tuition, so I was going to a free school. On my 17th birthday, I walked up and says, I quit. I'm going in the service. And the dean says, well, go ahead and take off. Go home, talk it over with your parents, come back and we'll forget everything. Well, with me, I hitchhiked to the recruiting station 150 miles away in Cincinnati. I go in, get 2 copies of parents' consent. I tell my father, I says, Mother has custody and I need you to sign parents' consent so we don't have to go to court. So of course my father signed it. My poor mother, she was working as a waitress in New York, so I sent her a copy and says, I'm out of school, can't get back in, and Dad has already signed, so you have to sign. So my mother had no choice, so my 17th birthday, I had parents' consent to go in the Marine Corps. And I was in Cincinnati. I was sworn in one day in Cincinnati. The recruiting officer told me, this got me. He says, now you're going to get on the train and the train will take you to Parris Island. And I'm going to give you food chits. So when you get to the land of Georgia, you can get off and go into the restaurant and eat. Well, I didn't understand. I thought, a land of Georgia? Boy, this must be Marine Corps talk. So here I'm puzzled thinking, well, how will I know when I get to the land of Georgia? Well, when I got there, I realized he was saying Atlanta, Georgia. So I got off in Atlanta, I got back on, got on the train, rode the train until I got to about Yemassee, South Carolina. On Yemassee, they put us on another train that had 3 cars, one for the passengers, one for Marines, and one for luggage. Mm-hmm. So we get on this train and we ride into Parris Island. When I get to Parris Island, this was in 1949. We started our boot camp and the drill instructor says, you'll never finish your service in the Marine Corps because they're going to do away with the Marine Corps. There's never going to be another war. So I went through boot camp. When I got out of boot camp, they kept me at Parris Island as a swimming instructor. Mm-hmm. I had a promise that I would be a swimming instructor, teach recruits how to swim, and at the end of the season, I would become a drill instructor. At this time, the Marine Corps had PFC corporals and sergeant drill instructors. Anybody could be a drill instructor. So I was looking forward to be a drill instructor. About July of 1950, the war broke out. Somebody came in and said, North Korea has invaded South Korea. Well, I got my orders to go to Camp Lejeune to join an infantry unit. I had an infantry MOS, but I'd never been in the infantry. So I went to Camp Lejeune, and I trained as a rocket. I started off as a flamethrower, and no way did I want to carry that gas tank on my back with all the fuel in it, so I talked them into making me a rocket gunner.
Okay.
So I became a rocket gunner. In December of 1950, they says everybody can have leave. So they give everybody leave, let us all go home. And when we came back, they says, we're mounting out. We're going to Korea. They took us over one night, issued us a sea bag of cold weather gear. We had snow suits, heavy clothing. And the following day, they brought 8 troop trains aboard the base and put us on the troop trains going to Treasure Island. Our orders read Treasure Island. I was a young boy from Kentucky. I'd never been aboard a big ship. So we spent about a week going across country on this troop train. When we pull into Oakland Army Base. And there's a big ship there. It's had 4 stacks on it. And I said, hey, boy, that's a big ferry taking us over to Treasure Island. But when we landed, we pulled in to Pohang, Korea. The ship could not tie up at the dock, so we anchored out. And we wore our greens. The Marines had wool greens with battle jackets. The Army had an Ike jacket, which fit tight, but the Marines designed their jacket bag so we could put grenades in there. So we climbed down the nets. We had to go down the net of the Darby into ducks, the Army, the trucks, the amphibious trucks. We landed at Pohang. When we climbed down the nets, the nets were frozen. There was ice on there. We're wearing a field transport pack with our rifle, helmet, and it's horrible life jackets. The life jackets are just filthy and big and bulky, but we got the life jackets down into the boats. They dropped our sea bags. We didn't have to carry the sea bags down the nets. But anyway, we got in the boat. They landed us in Pohang. The division, the 1st Marine Division had just completed the Chosin Reservoir campaign, and they was back in Mason licking their wounds and getting reinforced. At this time, 85% of the 1st Marine Division was made up of reserves, and I became a rifleman. So I joined this platoon, and the platoon, they really laughed at us. The platoon was under strength. Instead of the 40 men, there was probably about 15, and we had probably about 20 new people came in, and here we came in with our packs on and our sea bags and all this, and they really laughed at us. They said, you don't need all that stuff. So next day the platoon sergeant came in and says, take everything except what you're wearing, put it in a sea bag, and take it and throw it down to the battalion supply. And we had numerous skirmishes. About September rolled around. In September, I'm a squad leader. We had, it was the last offensive operation the Marine Corps had during the Korean War. We had to take this one position, this hill. It was, I think, Hill 673, or it had a number on it, and the numbers come from the
altitude. Probably.
Altitude. And anyway, we had to take this hill, our battalion. And Alpha Company had attempted to take it the morning and got wiped out, heavy casualties. The afternoon, Bravo Company had tried to take it, and they had casualties. So they figured, well, we're going to do something different. We're going to have a night attack. We did not have too many night attacks. So Charlie Company, we had to move out on a night attack. Here there's about 200 men. We're moving around the base of the hill, going to hit it from the right side in a column, about 6 paces between men at night. you were just far enough back where you could see the man in front of you. And while we're moving out, the explosions are going off around us, and we're having casualties, and we figured, well, the enemy is mortaring us. And so after about an hour, we're getting casualties. They found out, hey, we're in a minefield. Those are not mortars. So here, we're a company in the middle of a minefield in the middle of the night. The enemy realized that we're there, and they started mortaring us. So we turn around, and they want us to come back to where we jumped off. So here we're probably about 1 o'clock in the morning. It's dark. We're trying to move back. You have to walk in the footsteps of the man in front of you. You don't want to step in a mine. The enemy's mortaring you. You can't get down. You have to stay up, and you're carrying the wounded and the dead. But we get back about, it's probably about 6 o'clock. We get back to where we jumped off in the assault. And the following morning, they decided we are going to form the entire battalion together and have an assault on this hill. Now, the hill was covered with pine trees at one time, and we had airstrikes on it. The pine trees had been knocked down, covered with vegetation. The enemy was dug in. It was not Chinese, it was North Korean. And at the time, I thought the North Koreans fought a lot harder than Chinese. Later on, I found out why. The reason was the Chinese was behind them, and if they pulled back, the Chinese would kill the North Koreans.
Oh, boy.
So they had to stay and die.
Right.
We get to the top of the hill at about 5 o'clock, 1700. And we get to the top of the hill, and there was we were getting far out of a bunker. And I took and threw a hand grenade, a Mark II hand grenade into the bunker. Well, when I threw a grenade in there, a Chinese comm grenade came out. And I got blown up quite a bit, but their grenades were concussion grenade. I had blood coming out my ears and my nose and all that. Anyway, I would not let the corpsman evac me. I did not want to go back to that hospital and run into that nurse again. And but anyway, that was we was able to take the hill.
That was the reason for your first
That was my first Purple Heart.
And as a result of Operation Punch Bowl, you get wounded severely, and where do you go from there?
Well, after that operation, we come back to the rear. First sergeant calls me in and says, Helton, you've been transferred to regiment for your last month over here. I didn't want to go, but I went back to regiment. I was promoted to sergeant and I became sergeant of the guard. On January the 1st, they had a ship came in and I was due to go home. I was asked, do you want to extend? If you'll extend, we'll promote you to staff sergeant on the spot.
Okay.
And I said no, because I thought that we had stopped being offensive, and I thought the Korean War was going to stop, and we were going to get pushed off of Korea.
Yeah.
Well, while I was in Korea, on my fitness reports, I had requested I want to serve my next duty in Washington, D.C. I get orders for 8th and I in Washington, D.C., ceremonial troops.
Mm-hmm. This is in Washington. This is 1952.
1952. I report into Washington. Here, I report in. I'm underweight. I weighed about 120 pounds. They'd issued me a new uniform. It didn't fit. I probably had too long a hair. And I report in the ceremonial troops in D.C. And the commanding officer looks at me and said, how the blank did you get here? Mm-hmm. Because normally to be at 8th and I, you're supposed to be 6 foot tall, weight in proportion with your body height and all this. Mm-hmm. Well, I wound up in the ceremonial troops in Washington making parades.
And about that time, I remember that you were involved in the movie Stars and Stripes.
They formed the Clifton Webb movie, Stars and Stripes Forever, while I was there. And they was short of people, of band members
Okay.
because the band members had their regular duty, so they grabbed me, give me a band uniform, give me a set of cymbals, and for 2 weeks I marched back and forth on the mall hitting the cymbals for this movie. And I figured, boy, I'm really going to be in the movie. Well, when the movie came out, there's a small flicker at the end of the Marine Band today, but I was in the movie Stars and Stripes Forever.
Okay. And after you left the 8th and I, you went to sea duty on the Leyte.
And he says, we need a gunnery sergeant for the USS Leyte. It was a carrier in the Atlantic.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, if you'll extend for a year, we'll let you be the gunny on the Leyte. So I'll go. So I reported aboard the Leyte. They were at Norfolk. They were anchored out.
Mm-hmm.
And when I reported aboard, I relieved a tech sergeant. The Marine Corps, in the 50s, the Marine Corps did not have the rank of gunnery sergeant. It was staff sergeant and tech sergeant. But I relieved a tech sergeant, and the ship was anchored out, so I had to ride a small boat out to the ship. And I report aboard the ship, and this tech sergeant comes up and says, you're Helton, I've been looking for you for 2 years. You're my replacement. You got the troops, you got the brig, you got the guns. I'd tell you more, but I'm in a hurry.
Mm-hmm.
He jumped on a boat, and I never seen him again. So I wound up with a gunnery sergeant of a 65-man Marine detachment, and I wasn't old enough to buy a beer. I was still 19. Had a great cruise aboard the Leyte. And
after that, you had duty on the Northampton.
Well,
how did that happen?
What happened was when the Leyte came back from our med cruise, they decided it was too old and it was too small. It was one of the small World War II carriers.
Mm-hmm.
It was...
so it was eventually retired.
Yeah, they retired. So they decided to make it a submarine chaser, and I got orders for the USS Northampton, which was being built in Boston. It was the President's flagship. It was a regular Navy cruiser with an additional deck on there. Well, I report aboard, and I'm in Boston. We were in dry dock. The ship hadn't been commissioned yet,
mm-hmm.
and we was on there for about a week, and we went through the commission ceremony. It was commissioned of March of '53. Once they commissioned it, we went to Guantanamo Bay for a shakedown. And we had our shakedown crew. We went down, we trained, and we had Liberty. I got to go on Liberty in Havana. This mm-hmm. was in the days of Batista. So we pulled in on a weekend when we weren't training. We pulled in Havana, and I got to go on a tour of the city of Havana. And that was something. We left Havana, came back, trained, went to Haiti, seen most of the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
I got orders to Echo 2nd Battalion, 2nd Marines.
Mm-hmm.
And I reported into Echo Company, and that was a 2-year tour. And when I reported into Echo, we're training to go back on a med cruise. And this was something, but this time though, it was as an amphibious outfit. So we went aboard the APA Pickaway 222 for a 6-month med cruise. Mm-hmm. I just came off a med cruise on the Leyte the year before, and we went back to the same places, except this time we got to make about 4 amphibious landings. One of our amphibious landings was with the British, and it was something to train with the British.
After this part of your tour, you then the U.S. Marine Corps in its wisdom decided they wanted to make you a drill instructor. So they sent you in 1955 to Parris Island. Why don't you tell us about that experience?
Well, upon reporting back after a med cruise, the Marine Corps needed drill instructors. So I wound up getting a quota for DI school. They had a school now. Previously, there was no DI school. Years before, if you were there and they needed you, you'd become a drill instructor. Well, I went back to DI school, and it was a 12-week school, and they treated us about like recruits. It was all corporals through tech sergeants in the class. And we had 12 weeks of school, and I was determined that I was going to be first in the class. So I studied, and I wound up being the honors student.
Good for you.
And got a certificate. And I went on the drill field, and start off with, I was a junior drill instructor.
After you left Paris Island and your drill instructor training experience, you then went to Okinawa.
After my tour on Paris Island, I wound up with my orders of the 3rd Marine Division on Okinawa. And I thought that was great. I reported to Okinawa, and I report in, and the company I joined, I was real fortunate because the company platoon leader I had at Paris Island, he had gone over, and he was the company commander, and one other drill instructor had gone over, and there was 3 of us in the same company. It was Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 9th Marines in the 3rd Marine Division on Okinawa. We're on Okinawa for probably about 30 days, and they have a landing in the Philippines. And I got assigned the Embark NCO, so I had to do all the loading and planning and all this in addition to running my platoon. And we had went to the Philippines, and we had a landing at Dingali Bay in the Philippines. And you're not going back to Okinawa, you're going to Japan. So they took and landed us, and we went to North Camp Fuji, Japan.
Yeah.
That was quite a place.
And you climbed Mount Fuji.
And for recreation and education, one Sunday we all volunteered to climb Mount Fuji. And anybody that didn't want to go could request Mass with the Colonel when we came back. It took us probably, we were at North Camp Fuji was our camp, and the 3rd Marine Division was, we were in 3 different camps. And but anyway, it took us about 4 hours to get to the top of Fuji. We were supposed to go up Fuji, spend the night, and see the sunset the next morning. Well,
after your Okinawa experience, you were sent to AT Battalion back in Camp Lejeune.
Well,
why don't you tell us about that?
While I would still request an infantry, and I was happy because here I was leaving the 3rd Division, and I had orders back to the 2nd Division of Camp Lejeune. Now, when I report into a division, when I report any place, I'd always have a fresh uniform ready for inspection, and I would come aboard the base, put on the uniform, and report in with my. So I report in, and I tell the clerk, I says, Staff Sergeant Helton, I'm reporting in for duty, and I want to go to the 6th Marines and make another med cruise. I knew they were making a med cruise. And the clerk comes back and he says, Sergeant, he says, I'm sorry, but there's some major back there looking at your record book, and you are the new S4 chief for the anti-tank battalion. Well, the Marine Corps had just formed the anti-tank battalion. It was something new. We had the Ontos. This was a small, we'd say a tank with 6 106 rifles on there, and it was new. So, and the S4 is administrative office. He would come up, anyway, he was a headquarters company commandant, and he would come up and visit all the staff jobs, and he'd come up and says, Sergeant, what's your job? And I said, Sir, I'm the S4 chief. And he says, well, what does the S4 chief do? I said, well, sir, I see that the office maintained, draw the supplies, and make sure the coffee's made. After the anti-tank battalion, I wound up going back to the drill field. I became a drill instructor for another tour on the drill field. Leaving the drill field, I went to reserve duty in Chicago. I was training the reserves in Chicago. Then when the Cuban Missile Crisis broke out, one of the most important things that I think we've had in the United States that people don't realize, they had Russian missiles in Cuba 90 miles from the United States they could have wiped out 1/3 of our population. I wound up dug in Cuba.
I remember that very well from being in high school at the time.
Yeah, and at the time, I thought we was in Gitmo to defend it. But later on, I found out we were only there to be sacrificed. The well-trained troops were all aboard ship. They were going to make a landing in the northern part of Cuba. From after the Cuban Missile Crisis, we came back to Lejeune. I got a set of orders for sea duty. I went aboard the USS St. Paul on the West Coast. So I get moved to the West Coast. At the St. Paul, we had First Fleet flagship. They made the movie In Harm's Way aboard the St. Paul. Then we wound up going to Japan, to Vietnam when the war broke out. So they needed officers bad, so they sent me a set of bars through the mail.
And you were commissioned on the St. Paul?
I was commissioned on the St. Paul. I became a lieutenant, and I was given a gun directory. So I'm firing away on the coast of Vietnam, and my orders came in to come back to the States to get processed to go back to Vietnam in the infantry.
So the first time you were there for about 2 months, as I recall. Then you go back for a more extended tour.
For 13 months in the infantry.
And, we've identified many of the places that you stayed. Is there anything that stands out in particular during that period of time, other than the fact that you got your second Purple Heart at that period?
Well, we were moving north, and we got to Dong Ha, and about the first night in Dong Ha, we get hit by 120 rockets and mortars, and I get a piece of shrapnel, so I got my second Purple Heart at Dong Ha. I became a company commander as a second lieutenant. They give me a 400-man H&S company, and I'm company commander of a 400-man H&S company. I have my tour there for a year. I come back to Camp Pendleton.
Which you didn't like, as I remember.
No, I don't like Pendleton. I do not. When I left Korea, I said I never want to climb another mountain or see snow again. So I come back and I put a year at Pendleton, and I was embark officer. I had 3 amphibious landings with 3 different organizations. Then I go back to Vietnam. I wind up in Echo 2-3 as a company commander.
Right.
I worked my way up. I'm company commander of Echo 2-3. Then I became the S4 officer upon completing my tour in Vietnam. I come back to excuse me, to Camp Lejeune, and I'm a company commander of Delta 1-8, the same company I was in Guantanamo in as a platoon sergeant. I'm the company commander. Then the Vietnam War was over, and I got reverted back to Master Gunnery Sergeant. And upon being reverted to Master Gunnery Sergeant, I received orders to a college, Miami University of Ohio.
In the NROTC period.
NROTC.
And then after that, you were in the 3rd Marine Division?
After a tour in NROTC, I get orders back to 3rd Marine Division. I go into division headquarters. I'm the 4-stat chief. They had, I still had the infantry MOS, but they had no billets for a Master Gunnery Sergeant open. So I became the 4-stat. This was a computer job, and I was making reports to Joint Chiefs of Staff in Washington. And I put my year there, and I go back to the 2nd Marine Division, and I retire in the 2nd Marine Division.
And that
I
was
had 8
in,
tours there.
1979 when you
1979.
final retirement. Before we wrap up today, and I want to thank you for coming in to be with us for our show, I'd like to ask you a few questions about your feelings about the current Marine military, some of the changes that have occurred that you've commented on in our meetings at the Clovis Veterans Memorial District. Anything in particular that stands out that you've seen in the changes that have occurred, especially in the Marines in the last few years?
In the Marines, I think they are the finest force. I would have a hard time today in the Marine Corps. I was not as physical fit as they are today. We did not have, prior to about 1956, we didn't have that much physical training in the Marine Corps. Mm-hmm. And in boot camp, when I went through boot camp, the only time we had PT was when the drill instructor was mad at us. The drill instructors had a choice of PT or rifle inspections. So prior to 56, we had very little physical training, authorized physical training.
And now today we know how important it is.
It is important
today.
Especially
with women and other aspects of the military operation. Well, Bill, I want to thank you again for coming in to join us today, and I want to thank all of our viewers for coming back and joining us for this episode of Valley Veterans Forum. We look forward to seeing you again in the future.